Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, for years, one of the pillars of the petrodollar system was the promise that the U.S. would always be there to protect the Arab/Islamic kingdom of Saudi Arabia from other potential adversaries in the region. But with the recent shift in alliances taking shape all throughout West Asia, a new agreement between Pakistan and the Saudis is likely the final nail in the petrodollar coffin.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is a tectonic shift in that region because while you were calling it the death of the petrodollars, it's because in essence, and anyone will probably, or most people, or nearly everyone will know, the whole point with the Saudis were, well, look, here's the deal. We'll buy your oil, we'll give you dollars, and you'll then take those dollars and buy US treasuries. And in return, we will provide you security guarantees that in the event of instability in the region or you being attacked as a nation, then obviously we'll defend you. And for quite a few decades, that was always seen to be uh, the way the relationship was. But of course, over time, the Saudis began to get more and more frustrated, particularly in the last few years, with the United States. And consequently, things like the rapprochement between Saudi and Iran, which we spoke about years ago, and people said that would never happen, and lo and behold, it happened. And also, of course, more integration of Saudi in with the Chinese and with the Russians. And there has been rumors for quite a few years that there was some developments going on with regards to a security arrangement between the Saudis and, of course, Pakistan. Now, there's no doubt, and they've basically both said this discussion has, or discussions on this matter have been going on for years. The fact they've come out and made an announcement, which we're going to discuss shortly, and why it's incredibly important to understand the relevance of it, has no doubt been accelerated, whether it's weeks, months, doesn't really matter, by events that happened in Qatar when Israel launched an attack on September the 9th, saying they were trying to kill members of Hamas. They failed to do so. They did kill 6 people, but no one in the hierarchy of Hamas. And of course, there was outrage, not least because Qatar, which has the biggest US military base in the region, turned around to the Americans and went, you were supposed to defend us. Where were you? You were nowhere to be seen. Now, the Americans claim they didn't know anything about the attack. They were told at the last minute. Now, subsequently, there are stories doing the rounds that Trump didn't know anything. And none of this would surprise me. But in essence, that seems to have been the straw that broke the camel's back. And one could arguably say Saudi and Pakistan have had this deal waiting to be officially signed for a considerable period of time. And on the back of that event, that is the straw, pardon the pun, because we're talking about camels, but it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And obviously, they decided, well, now's the time to make that announcement. Now's the time for the Saudis to invite the Pakistani Prime Minister. And we're going to make an announcement. We're not going to discuss the specifics just yet because obviously we want to get Ken's initial thoughts and then we'll dig into the detail of it. But this is an enormous shift and we'll explain there are all the reasons why that is the case.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things about this relationship, for all intents and purposes, it's like, why is Indonesia Islamic when they're not Arab in any capacity? Pakistan, of course, is Sunni, which is the sect of Islam that Saudi Arabia is. So there's always been that partnership, that brotherhood for the Sunni sect. So with that being said, you go back to the 1960s, and Pakistan's received more aid from Saudi Arabia than any other nation. Pakistan, meanwhile, helped protect the borders of Saudi Arabia during the Iran-Iraq War. So a lot of these uh, partnerships go back, what now, 60 years. And it's really not surprising that as West Asia really starts to unfold and change transition, we're starting to see even Pakistan, which is not naturally part of West Asia, having strange bedfellows by signing an agreement.
Well, I mean, it's true they've been very close allies in many capacities for decades. So it's not surprising in that sense. The surprising thing is the nature of this agreement, because in essence, by Saudi entering into what amounts to a NATO agreement or alliance with Pakistan, which is what it is, because they came out and both sides have clarified that any attack on either a country is an attack on both. So it is a type of Article 5 arrangement, and that is probably a real Article 5 arrangement, not like NATO, where the United States wouldn't defend any country if push came to shove. But clearly, on the basis of signing this, this is where the essence of what the petrodollar is, which is providing security. The Saudis clearly no longer trust the United States, is notional security guarantees. And after what happened with Qatar, why would they do so? Of course, there was the question asked, because Pakistan has a nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence. When they asked, does that include nuclear weapons? Then the Saudis came out and said it encompasses all military means. So it absolutely does. Therefore, Saudi is now protected by Pakistan's nuclear umbrella. And that is as bad a news as the United States could get out the region, because they've never wanted Saudi Arabia to have any nuclear weapons. They're very reluctant for Saudi to have any nuclear technology, even if it's for peaceful means, which is interesting because the Saudis and the Chinese continue to have enormous cooperation rather quietly about peaceful use of obviously nuclear technology, so nuclear reactors, etc. So in essence, that now means that Saudi Arabia is protected by Pakistan's nuclear umbrella. This will also deeply anger the Israel, because they don't want any country in the region to have nuclear weapons. It's as simple as that. There's no discussion point in that regard. That's just a statement of fact. So the next question, therefore, is on the back of this, because there was a summit in Doha where not a lot was actually agreed. It seemed like it was pretty meaningless. I think a lot was said that wasn't publicly disclosed in this 25 paragraph communique that was issued, but they obviously did make some points with regards to have the implementation of a two-state solution with 1967 borders for Palestine. They also made reference to the fact that they had solidarity with Qatar in all measures to take, because of what they perceived to be the Israeli aggression, which and to safeguard its sovereignty, stability. There wasn't a lot given as to what that meant. Now, and there's a whole bunch of other discussion points which I'm not going to get into. If you want to read about the summit, you can do so. The telling point with regards to this is on the back of this, we have this announcement with Saudi and Pakistan. Now we're also hearing that the UAE and Qatar are looking at joining this alliance also. Now, bearing in mind with regards to Pakistan, they and increasingly the Saudis are wanting to buy Russian Chinese military technology. Pakistan buys most of its military hardware is from China. So this is then you start to see that the military industrial complex is going to get its nose put out of joint by this arrangement also. So all of a sudden you're starting to see this whole integration between Saudis, Pakistan, you can include Russia in this regard, China, Iran, maybe then the UAE, Qatar, how long before Oman joins, etc., etc. And all of a sudden the whole security architecture of West Asia bears no resemblance to what it did, and that, in essence, means the end of the petrodollar, not just by the virtue of the fact that Saudi is trading more and more in non-dollar terms, but also the fact Saudi really doesn't sell that much oil anymore to the United States. Anyway, it's being pared down to the bone in recent years. That is not going to continue to suddenly dramatically increase again. So there's been a lot of warning signs that the Saudis were looking to walk away from this arrangement, and I think the Israeli attack on Qatar was the final straw, and that then is now set the wheels in motion for all these other changes that are now ongoing.
Now, there's one thing to take a look at, and historically, obviously, nothing happens in the future the exact same way it did in the past. But it appears more and more that what's happening in West Asia is similar to what we saw leading up to the start of World War One, where there were alliances with alliances with alliances and bedfellows all over the place. So you have the United States, which at certain times has been an ally of Pakistan, of course, has been an ally with Saudi Arabia, of course, has been an ally with many, most of the other nations. They were an ally under Richard Nixon in the late 70s with Iran before the revolution. And then, of course, they sided with Iraq against Iran, and it just goes back and forth. So you've got the United States involved with alliances with certain countries within there. You have China and Russia with Iran. You have, through a proxy of Pakistan, China with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and that they may want to join the SCO or the BRICS. So you have all these alliances that are suddenly bringing all the superpowers together, backing different focal points, and you have to wonder if it's going to be something that protects from war starting, or is it something that might lead to it, like it did in 1914.
Yeah, well, there's definitely these enormous changes. Worth noting, Ken, UAE is a member of BRICS, by the way, already.
Yeah,
So,
right.
I mean, and Saudi Arabia kind of is, but isn't admitting to it. Well, I think maybe at some point Saudi's going to then just say that as a matter of fact also. But that's by the by, it's not really relevant to this discussion specifically. But what is very clear is this: if this starts to change the architecture, then we have to factor in not just nations like the UAE and obviously Qatar, etc. The question is, where does Turkey fit into all this? Because Turkey, as we know, is a NATO member. Turkey's kind of wants to, and it's not playing both, so they just want the best of all worlds. They think they can sort of work the system to their advantage. Well, at some point, they're going to have to make a decision. And the question is, are they going to come out? Because if they join an alliance in that region, it really is the end of their NATO membership, basically. So, but they won't want to be left out either. And if this security arrangement is robust, as it would logically seem to be, then countries will want to join. They'll feel protected by safety in numbers. And by drawing Pakistan in, they have this nuclear umbrella, which is what not all of the nations wanted, but there was a feeling that in the region, well, if Israel's got nuclear weapons and no one else has, there's a bit of an imbalance here. Well, it remains to be seen what the Americans make of this, what the Israelis make of it. But this is the beginning of a massive change in that region, not just in terms of trade, which was going on with BRICS membership or just bilateral, multilateral trade. This is the very security architecture that really has been in place since the birth of the petrodollar. And the US made a very bad error of judgment in not saying anything and actually coming to the aid of the Qataris, which is what they're supposed to do. So in essence, it's another big, huge mistake, and the US continues to put, basically to make these really, really bad errors of judgment, and they pay a big price for it. And I think there's no doubt when you look at the consequences of this, this will only likely to escalate in terms of this alliance. And it's worth mentioning for the last decade, there's been talk of having this NATO style so-called Arab force to defend Arab nations. Egypt's talking about it again because they've had this. I said it's been in discussions since about 2015. Of course, what's the catalyst for that? It's what happened with Israel and Qatar. It's given it sort of impetus to do so. So is that going to be something that's bolted into this whole Saudi-Pakistan arrangement? It could well be. It might be something separate, but it would seem unlikely, but who knows? I mean, it's stalled so many times in the past, it may stall again in the future. And it's not just a given that it'll just be created and it'll be an easy path to integrate all so-called, obviously, Arab and Islamic nations, which includes countries who will be part of this, is in North Africa. So Morocco is one example, and Algeria. So it becomes this enormous alliance. And consequently, there are going to be huge changes if that security architecture is in place. I think it green lights the plans that Saudi and China have had to really expand the Belt and Road from Saudi's perspective. One could argue that this will see the China-Pakistan economic corridor to also include the Persian Gulf now, which will include the likes of Saudi Arabia. So this is where suddenly the multipolar world from an economic, financial standpoint can begin to make massive strides also. That is why it's that significant. This should not be underestimated as something trivial. There are people trying to make out that this is just trivial, and it is not. This is a huge undertaking, and potentially it's a big risk for these two to stick their head above the parapet, because there's absolutely no doubt the US will not be happy about this, and neither will Israel in the process. And then you risk almost pitching large parts of West Asia will be seen to be pitched against Israel, and that obviously is not good for stability. But the argument is this could put a lot of pressure on the Americans to realize we're going to have to take a different line in how we deal with problems, and not least the whole two-state solution, which every country in that region, and the Russians and the Chinese too, have said 1967 borders, two-state solution, it has to happen. I know a lot of people in the West go, you can't have that. Well, the alternative is what? There is no alternative. So it's one day it will have to happen, and I think this could also be the catalyst to make that happen as well.
Yeah, and something else to take into consideration is not only the nail in the coffin of the petrodollar, because the security portion was part of the petrodollar agreement. And while oil has been sold in different currencies now for quite a while, it's this security function, this pillar, that really was the final thing holding it up. But if you take a look at it, the U.S. has been duplicitous, for better lack of a term, in just about everything that it has done foreign policy. I mean, the U.S., going back to Trump's first administration, tried to push this Abraham Accord, and there was uh, some headway that was taking place. So much so that Saudi Arabia started making overtures to Iran for the first time in decades. That was what it was leading to. But certain choices that have taken place over the last number of years have scuttled that completely. And now everything it seems that's coming from Washington is reactionary, not planned out, not done with diplomacy, but reactionary. Like what was mentioned in the UK yesterday, where President Trump wants to, we need to go and retake Bagram Air Base, get Afghanistan to give it to us so we can monitor and be close to China's nuclear, weapons facilities. When you take a look at that, why would a nation that had been beaten down for 20 years, that probably despises the United States, they're just going to go ahead and give President Trump access to a base inside their country? No, this is the problem: is the United States is acting completely irrationally, and it's forcing many of the West Asian nations to have to come to their own defense and protection. And I think this is a big part of it.
Well, yeah, it's the timing of that statement just reinforces the viewpoint. Well, we can't trust you because you're just going to want to march into Afghanistan, which is not going to happen. For what reason? I mean, they're just basically, yeah, that's a gambit because he's talking to Xi today and he mentions China and he thinks, oh, that'll stir the Chinese up and I'll get them to agree to my trade deal. And Xi's going to look at Trump and go, what are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous. That makes no difference. And we're not entertaining some fanciful idea on that basis and you think you can leverage us, China, with that. We're not stupid. I mean, and that's the problem. People are seeing through that behavior. They're realizing it's ridiculously transparent and it's a game you can only play so many times until it becomes pointless. And now we've reached the point where it's pointless. So we have to also be a bit mindful, though, that while he makes these statements that don't ultimately always mean anything, that just stirs up more concern in that whole West Asia region. And, because of course, Pakistan shares a border with Afghanistan. So, there are concerns about this. And when you start making these ill-advised comments, it just reinforces the view it's time for a different security model. And certainly I've spoken on my own podcast a lot in recent years about the entire security model for the region, including Pakistan, India, including Afghanistan, and including the Central Asian republics, the former Stan republics of the Soviet era, so Kazakhstan, etc. So it is a huge uh, issue, and the United States needs to tread very carefully when making flippant remarks that actually can carry some extremely negative overtures towards nations who are already not too sure anymore who they're dealing with and what they're dealing with America, that is.
Indeed. Paul, are there any other final comments you wanted to make regarding this?
No, I think that's a good point to stop.
Yeah, I think we covered quite a bit. To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.